America's West Coast in the early 1950s was the center for much of the new cool school of music. It was here in 1952 that Mulligan met the handsome trumpeter, Chet Baker, and formed a chamber group, a quartet, with the then novel idea of playing without a piano.
The quartet kind of started accidentally. They were playing on a small bandstand, didn't have room for a piano, whatever. And they just hit immediately, and then Time magazine did an article about them, and then virtually overnight everybody was talking about the Gerry Mulligan Quartet. And then Chet Baker was a movie star, kind of glamour about him, and just the whole thing was the right group at the right time.
The quartet's versions of standard tunes, like My Funny Valentine, led to the setting up of a new record label, Pacific Jazz, and West Coast Jazz was born. Mulligan's swinging tunes were an immediate hit with a new white generation of fans.
Pacific Jazz, which is a label that Chet and Gerry recorded for, which was launched specifically for their records, were very, very good at these kind of cool West Coast images, and they presented the music in that way, made it desirable. You know, like college kids wanted to look like Chet and Gerry. You know, they wanted to hang out with these guys, and so vis-a-vis they would take the records home and play them and dream about being a cool West Coast musician.
In the history of American entertainment, including jazz, it usually takes a white musician, or it had, not so much now, but for a long time it usually took a white musician playing black music to be able to bring that music to a mass audience. The obvious examples would be Benny Goodman, Elvis Presley, Bing Crosby, many others. And I think that, especially in California and Los Angeles at that time, white high school kids and college kids coming to a club would have identified more with somebody like Gerry and Chet.
The Mulligan-Baker Quartet lasted only a year, but Mulligan's decision to sideline the piano, the main harmonic instrument in jazz bands, was a style he would repeat with other chamber groups.
There was just the trumpet and the baritone, bass player and drums. So that meant there was no harmony left in the music. It was just about lines.
My job is to play a note on every beat that establishes the basic harmonic structure of the song. And on that, the other two horn players can build their own melodies and their own counterlines.
When the trumpet player is playing a solo, bass player is playing, he'll play small figures such as we were then able to hear the way that Mulligan could contribute to the ensemble using basically a technique called counterpoint. Counterpoint, like briefly explained, I mean, if we assume that you've got a melody line, then if we add a bass line, it becomes a counterpoint to that. It changes the melody.
It's the two instruments who are having this sort of dialogue between each other. Rather than have the dialogue with the rhythm section, they're actually having the dialogue with each other as horn players. No one had had that sound before. It was a completely new sound.
Mulligan's career nearly fell apart in 1952 when he was arrested on drug charges. He was busted with Chet Baker after one of their gigs. Baker was let off, but Mulligan spent 3 months in prison. It was the end of the quartet, and Mulligan had to undergo cold turkey behind bars.
Gerry got involved with drugs the same time that whole generation did. Drugs were like an unknown quantity that promised the moon. And everybody tried it out. And some people got stuck with it. You know, some people died.
50s, there was loads of high-profile busts. You know, Gerry Mulligan got busted up, Pepper, loads of the musicians, and it was part of the whole club culture, part of the images. You know, they're playing in clubs where maybe there was a lot of pushers, a lot of pimps. You know, those are the people who opened and ran the clubs. It became a kind of heroin chic became associated with the music. Now, obviously, that isn't the case anymore. But maybe at that time it gave it an edge, a danger, something like rock music has now.
But in 50s Hollywood, jazz had become a byword for sleaze. Gerry's celebrity led to small roles in films. He played in the opening scenes of the film noir, I Want to Live. The film is about a good-time girl, a Mulligan fan, who ends up on death row.
The way jazz musicians were characterized is that they were part of a seedy kind of subterranean life, which was just so offensive to everybody. I mean, Gerry had his problems, but to always portray jazz musicians as in a little corner in a dark club that's populated almost exclusively by prostitutes, grifters, and drug addicts, that's a myth that's been going on for a long time. For years, whenever you'd see a prostitute on the screen, in the background you'd hear an alto or a tenor saxophone going, you know, playing a big, silly glissando. And that really hasn't changed. People, for some reason, Hollywood is the last community that is really attached to this idea that jazz musicians are somehow associated with all kinds of sleazy, you know, self-denigrating behavior.
Mulligan's film career was brief, but the money helped to finance his bands. By the end of the 50s, cool was over. Mulligan, who never considered himself a cool musician, played with artists from Duke Ellington to Thelonious Monk. His next innovation came in 1960, when he started a jazz chamber orchestra, the Concert Jazz Band.
This was at a time when big bands were virtually dead because you couldn't afford to do it. And he got a record company behind him, and he put together the best musicians in New York City. He called it the Concert Jazz Band to underscore the fact that this was not a band for dancing. This was not that kind of an orchestra. This was concert music written for the classic instrumentation of brasses, reeds, rhythm. American invention, the big band.
But the Concert Jazz Band was too expensive to maintain, and it folded in 1964. By then, a new era of music had dawned.